You mentioned earlier that you left New York, and I'm actually really excited to ask this because I get to finally ask one of you guys. Why did you in particular leave New York, right? Because Miami has been, dude, New Yorkers have just come here and filled the city up and transplants everywhere. Luckily, you didn't come down to Florida. You went, you're not Florida, right? I'm guessing you're probably somewhere else.
No. I'm in New Jersey. I'm like an hour outside of New York City.
So you're not that far.
That's not even bad.
But yeah, that's not even that bad.
It's the same thing.
But yeah, why? Because obviously, like after 2020, everyone left New York. Like, what were your main reasons? Like, I got to get the hell out of here. Was it the lockdowns? Was it the extreme leftism? Is it just the crime? Because I think New York City's failed.
Yes. Well, I agree with you that it's failed. And by the way, I've had to fight moving to Florida a few different times. That Patrick Bet David has tried to get me down there, and he's made it pretty tempting.
Yeah.
But so what happened with me was, me and my wife, we had our first child at the very end of 2018. So through 2019, we were living on the Upper West Side of New York City, and my wife was she's from like the suburbs. I'm from New York City, but she's from the burbs, and she kind of wanted. She was kind of like, I'd really kind of rather go like get a house and have a big yard and have our kids in like a nice, town. And at the beginning of 2019, I was kind of like, no, we're not doing that. New York City is where I'm from. This is where my career is. I'm going to stay here. This is kind of where the action is. Mm-hmm. And I will say, as time went on, I just kind of started to agree with her a little bit more. Like I was like, yeah, it would kind of be nice to have a house, and it would kind of be nice to like have some space and just be around something a little bit prettier than New York City. Yeah. And okay, so my kid was born in December of 2018. So I have like a baby at this point. Mm-hmm. But and she's a girl, my oldest. And so as she's like 3 months, 4 months old, things like that. Like little babies don't really know what's going on. But as their dad, I did just start to notice like things I had always just taken for granted in my life, like homeless people all over the place. And then, you're kind of like, like this isn't a big problem right now. But do I really want her when she's 2, when she's 3, like just kind of seeing all of this stuff, all the stuff that I saw really early in life that I just kind of took for granted. But now I'm thinking to myself, maybe I actually don't want this. So I kind of started moving in the direction of like, maybe I do kind of want to get out of the city and put my girls in a little bit of a more secluded environment where they won't be around this stuff. And I'll tell you, it was like the gods came down, because I was renting an apartment on the Upper West Side, which, but as far as New York City goes, is like one of the nicest neighborhoods you could be in. I
was gonna say.
But so our lease was up. I believe it was up in either April or May of 2020.
Oh, right in the middle, at the worst time.
And so then the lockdowns hit in March.
Yeah.
And so the lockdowns hit and things started getting a little bit weird. And I got very the shelves started getting kind of empty very early on. Mm-hmm. And so immediately, I mean, even before the actual lockdowns hit, it was like the week before that, we got our stuff and got out of there. Okay. And then we went and we stayed at her parents' house for like a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. And then I was just like, once the lockdowns actually hit and I knew my lease was coming up anyway, I was like, all right, you know what? Yeah. I concede. You win this. It's not
worth the lower price
debate.
Of rent. It's not worth it. I'm out of here. Because that was the first time New York rent ever dropped.
Well, so the rent dropped, but then it went right back up like shortly after that. But so I immediately, because we were like in a little apartment that you're paying like an insane amount for. Yeah. So immediately I started renting a house out there, and for the same price that I was renting a little apartment in New York City, I got like this beautiful house out in Jersey. And then so like right away I was like, oh, I could kind of get used to this. This is not. And then as things were kind of crazy through the next couple years, then we ultimately ended up buying a house like out in the country, like really out there. And I gotta say, it's I never thought I could live outside of New York City because I was just so used to it, but it is the best decision I've ever made. I am so much happier and just enjoy life so much more being in the country than I ever did in the city.
Okay.
Yeah, I've always said, in my opinion, I think New York City is the most overrated place on earth. And it's not till like you leave that you realize, wow, there's places that are way better. I grew up there as a kid, in the early '90s, but I moved after. I was actually in Brooklyn too, I moved to Connecticut when I was like 9, so I don't consider myself a New Yorker. But I do remember, like, there was a crime wave in the 90s. I remember Giuliani coming in and cleaning up the streets and everything else like that. You're a bit older than me, so do you remember the Giuliani era? Are you a fan of Giuliani?
I'm not a fan of Giuliani for many reasons, but there's no question that during those years, New York City turned around.
Yeah.
And, it was really drastic. So I'm 41. I was born in 83, and Giuliani came in like, I don't know, 92, maybe something like that.
Early mid 90s he came in, and 1990 was the worst year, had the most murders. Or it was 91.
The David Dinkins years were like crazy. Now, of course, I was, in 1990, I was 7.
Yeah.
So it's not like I have like, like the best memories of it, or I wasn't like hanging out in adult situations, but I do remember just like, everything got stolen.
Yeah.
In New York City. I mean, you couldn't literally, things that it sounds like cartoonish to say, but you had to you had to chain up your garbage cans that were in front of your house. And then we found this out, literally, this is not an exaggeration, that my stepfather chained up the garbage cans and they stole the garbage lids.
Wow.
So he had to separately chain up the garbage lids and the garbage cans, because like that's just how because it was like crackhead crime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it didn't even make sense. They were just trying to take whatever they could take and go see if they could sell it or whatever. And then, but even after Giuliani came in, like it, when I was like an older kid, like, a preteen and a teenager, it was still a high crime environment in New York City that was like way worse than what any big city is today.
Yeah. It's New York City used to literally be. They used to call it Fear City in the '70s, and then it's kind of stuck with that name into the '80s. And the '90s, it was still terrible. I think the most murders were 91 or 90. And Brooklyn, it's interesting now. Like if you go to Brooklyn now, in a lot of these places, it's going through extreme gentrification. Because a lot of those yuppies got pushed out of Manhattan, and now the places that used to be terrible you would never go to in Brooklyn, like they're a lot cleaner and safer now with hipsters. So
yeah, for sure. And I don't even know exactly what explains it, but it's not just that the people got pushed out of Manhattan, because there's parts of Brooklyn now that are more expensive than Manhattan. Like it's I don't know, out of like I choose not to be there. But out of my group of friends that I grew up with, I think I might be the only one who could afford to still live in the neighborhood we came from if I wanted to.
Yeah.
Everybody got priced out.
Yeah. It's crazy, man. New York City, how expensive it's gotten, and I don't know how people make ends meet.